Thank you for coming this morning. Today we're going to talk about Little Alan's Law. Little Alan's Law is legislation that was initiated after a tragic incident this past winter where a young boy, Alan, was killed by a multiple convicted DWI offender who was driving a snowmobile. This legislation provides more consistent application of DWI laws regardless of the type of vehicle that is being driven. This change will more fully incorporate snowmobiles, all-terrain vehicles, and motorboats into the current DWI provisions in state law. Persons convicted of a DWI or someone who refuses testing, regardless of the vehicle type, will now lose their driver's license and will be prohibited from operating motorboats, snowmobiles, and recreational vehicles for 1 year. So for example, if you're convicted of a motorboat DWI or refuse testing, your driver's license will be suspended and you will be prohibited from operating motorboats, snowmobiles, and ATVs for 1 year. First-time DWI offenders that are operating off-road vehicles or motorboats will now be subject to the same chemical use assessments, conditional release, and plate impoundments of traditional DWI. These changes are effective August 1st and for violations occurring after that. Also in this language, in this legislation, the not a drop prohibition for people under the age of 21 is extended to all-terrain vehicles, snowmobiles, and motorboats. So currently, if you're under the age of 21 and you're operating a traditional motor vehicle, you cannot have any alcohol in your system. That now extends to snowmobiles, ATVs, and motorboats as well. We have a zero tolerance for people who endanger their own lives and especially the lives of others who are operating a motor vehicle, a recreational vehicle, or a motorboat while they're under the influence. This legislation makes our roadways, trail systems, and waterways much safer here in the state of Minnesota. I'd like to thank Representative Anne Neu, Senator Mark Koran for not only drafting and carrying this legislation, but building bipartisan support this past legislative session to get this passed. I'd like to thank Governor Mark Dayton for his support in signing this and his support all the way through the legislative process. And I'd also like to thank the Minnesota United Snowmobile Association and the ATV Association of Minnesota, who once they learned about these loopholes in the rec vehicle laws, stepped up and helped get this law passed. The commitment of Minnesota United Snowmobile Association and the ATV Association of Minnesota to provide safety education training for young riders and adult riders and building high quality trail systems in this state is paramount to the success of recreational sports here in this state. And lastly, I'd like to thank Alan's parents and Alan's family. This was a tragic incident, and they have been here to help support this legislation so that what happened to Alan hopefully will never happen again. So I'd like to thank the family, so thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Alan's maternal grandmother, Mary Beth Lonnie, and I say, take a bus, ride a bike, walk, Uber, Lyft, and ride share. Coleman should never, ever be allowed to drive any kind of motor vehicle for the rest of his life. When he gets out of prison, he'll be handed his license back, and this needs to be changed. This bill could have prevented little Alan's death, and I know it'll save other lives. How many children does an abuser of alcohol get to kill? And how many people do they get to injure? I believe that he has proved his unwillingness to stop drinking and mixing drugs. He has left a dark spot in our family's lives. My daughter and son-in-law are empty. The most I can hope for them is a few minutes of random happiness on any given day. That's not what they signed up for when they had little Alan. He took a boy full of love, full of happiness, full of curiosity, and full of wanting to help others without being asked. He took a boy who adored the outdoors. He loved hunting and fishing and biking. He was an extremely sociable boy and loved meeting people and learning something from them. Little Alan loved to cook with me, and he loved all things that ran with a motor or was plugged into electricity: boats, lawnmowers, leaf blowers, tools, snow blowers, electric mixers, as you'll see down there, and even the vacuum cleaner. Little Alan always vacuumed for me when he came over. When he wasn't involved in these activities, he was a loving little boy who loved to cuddle. My heart aches. I am empty. I can't even imagine the tragic pain my daughter and son-in-law feel on a daily basis. This bill is a great first step, but after the trial, I talked to Anne this morning, and I plan to advocate for much steeper penalties for DWIs. 4 DWIs is too much for a couple minutes in prison and then being able to get your license back. A crime like this demands permanently revoking driving privileges. So I say, take a bus or walk, but don't ever get behind the wheel of a motor vehicle again. He killed a little boy because he has no control over his drug and alcohol addiction. It's just not his problem. He has made it our problem and our sorrow.
All right, can you see me over the podium? So when I heard about the death of little Alan, that death, I cannot imagine, I don't think anyone in this room can imagine the devastation that the Keisenkoetter family has felt. And a little piece of that devastation was felt throughout our community. And I was furious when I learned that the man who committed this crime had had multiple DWIs. He had had his license revoked previously. He had ignition interlock on his vehicle. But because all of these incidents happened in a car, his privileges to drive snowmobiles, ATVs, and motorboats was untouched. And that was wrong. That was a loophole that we had in the law that needed to be fixed. And I'm so I am very appreciative of Colonel Smith and the DNR, to the Minnesota Snowmobilers Association, to the ATV clubs, for all of the groups who came together in support of this legislation. Truthfully, those groups, the ATVers, the snowmobilers, they all thought this was already the law. This was a loophole that needed to be fixed. I'm grateful for all the support we've had, grateful for the support of the Keisenkoetter family. They've been very supportive all the way along. Logan Coker is here today, little Alan's cousin. He actually testified on behalf of the bill in committee. There was not a dry eye in that room. This is important legislation. It's a start. We've closed some loopholes today, and I want to thank everyone for their support.
Thank you, Anne. I'm Senator Mark Koran, also from Senate District 32. I was honored to be able to carry the Senate version of the bill, and I think, like we do in many cases, unfortunately, this is out of tragedy that this is born. I have grandchildren myself, and I just can't imagine what the family's gone through. But to take this process and to carry it on from where it started, out of tragedy, but look, and Representative Neu and her team did a great job at looking at and finding out what are the consequences. To do a one-off piece of legislation always seems really good, but this ultimately ended up to be a very good piece of legislation, and the entire process worked. And I think we did a good thing about saving future lives. It moved through the process. We had to support. I was a little concerned moving through this process. People love their ATVs, they love their snowmobiles, they love their boats, but everybody in the entire process, it became a great foundation. Ultimately, the process ended to be that we added boats and we got rid of all of the exceptions. We didn't create any new legislation from the DUI policies. They were in place today for everybody that drove an automobile. There were greater consequences, as Representative Neu pointed out many times, to you driving your lawnmower intoxicated on a street than there were in an ATV, a boat, or a snowmobile. And in the last 20 years, since the last time anything significant has been done, the ATVs, snowmobiles, and boats have become a little bit more advanced in technology, speed, and maneuverability, and thus make them a lot more dangerous. We made sure to close every one of those loopholes that exist. And Alan's grandmother, I think, we'll both be committed to working with her to find out what do we need to do next to make sure that everybody understands, and as a community, we've accepted that we will not tolerate drinking and driving any motorized vehicle on any of our streets that put us in great hazards. Those things are important to us, and through the entire process, we had full support. And I can, that means everybody in society, all the associations have agreed that this is, out of tragedy, a very good process that we need to close the loophole. And it's clear, do not drink and drive any motorized vehicle. Appreciate the support that everybody's given us in the family, and certainly the DNR, Colonel Smith, he did a great job, as well as all the other associations, making sure that everybody knew there's no opposition. And so I was just very honored to make sure that we carried this bill home, and thank the governor for signing it, because it was absolutely the right thing to do. So thank you, everybody.
Questions? Just to be clear, this is only for motor vehicles. I mean, if it's a rowboat or something, it doesn't apply.
Yes.
And what about that lawnmower driver? Does it fit that also? Is it only?
That's under current law.
That's under current law.
Yeah.
So
They're treated as, a lawnmower on a public road is currently treated as a vehicle on a public road.
And far more significant consequences than your ATV, snowmobile, or boat today driving intoxicated.
there's nothing added to this, to the DWI law, other than motorboats, ATVs, and snowmobiles?
Actually, what it
How do you get up
did,
to the mic?
sorry, actually what it did is, so we didn't change any of the DUI legislation. What we did is removed exemptions that were carved out for motorboats, ATVs, and snowmobiles.
So can I say something as well? To be clear, previously, if you got a DWI on a snowmobile, ATV, or motorboat, you would incur a 1-year prohibition from driving those vehicles, and in addition to that, you would incur penalties associated with a DWI as though you had gotten it in your vehicle on a road. There was a first-time exemption for that. That is now gone. We removed that first-time exemption with this law. The reverse, however, was not true. If you get a DWI in your vehicle on the road, there were no prohibitions on driving ATVs, snowmobiles, or motorboats. So all we did with this legislation is relink those two things together, and we took away that first-time exemption. That's what happened.
For the DNR, how much kind of proactive enforcement can we do now?
So from a proactive enforcement perspective, it really doesn't change what we do. It's just once somebody has been convicted of driving or operating an ATV, snowmobile, or motorboat under the influence, the first-time exemption is gone, where it really didn't count as a DWI towards their traditional motor vehicle licensure. There wasn't the chemical assessments or any of the other things, or plate impoundment or anything. So it's really more about the penalty phase of operating a vehicle under the influence rather than the initial finding and arresting, because it has been law for a number of years that 0.08 is 0.08 whether you're in a minivan, an ATV, a snowmobile, or any other type of wrecked vehicle.
So you make that type of stop anecdotally on a trail, on a frozen lake,
Yes.
and the driver is above 0.08, does a breathalyzer, however you guys do your
Sure.
thing. And then they also you find out that their record, they are a convicted drunk driver. What happens in that moment? What happens to that person?
So when a person is stopped for a violation of some type and the officer detects that they may be impaired, they will go through the process of field sobriety testing, just like they would do it if somebody was stopped in a minivan. In this instance, if it was a boat or a snowmobile or an ATV, they would go through that protocol of field sobriety testing, probably be administered a PBT to get a preliminary breath test. And then from that point, that's when a record would be checked to see if they had any previous violations, because at that point, if they are above the legal limit or do show those signs of impairment where they need to be arrested, that would then influence the charging at that point and some of the other things that might fall into place, like if they have multiple violations, it could be a gross misdemeanor and the vehicle they're operating could be seized and held for forfeiture if convicted. And so it's really about the second half of the incident, the charging and that part of it, more so than the front part of detecting the violation.
If someone is convicted on a boat or you catch somebody and it's their first offense ever, do they lose their driver's license then as well? Is it fully the same as a DWI?
So as we sit here today, if their first violation of a DWI is in a motorboat, they would not lose their traditional driver's license opportunities. August 1st, tomorrow, if their first DWI is in a motorboat, they will lose their driver's license, just like if they were driving a minivan or a pickup truck or any other traditional motor vehicle. And that's that loophole that has been closed, that important loophole that has been closed with this, is there's no more first-time exemption if your first DWI is in a wrecked vehicle or watercraft.
Question for little Alan's grandmother. Come to the podium. You said your fight is not over. What do you hope lawmakers listen to you and help create? You talk about people who have a DUI and cause someone's death. You don't want them to ever drive again. Am I hearing correctly?
Yeah, I think 4 DWIs is way too much. Even 3, like baseball, 3 strikes you're out. I think that's too much. I mean, in November, on little Alan's birthday, that's when he had his 3rd one, and he injured a woman and he left the scene of the crime. And then he got a snowmobile, and then he killed my grandson. And I'm very motivated to make the laws stiffer. People get a DWI and they pay the fines and they go to the classes and then they get their license back. And some people just have a real problem with drugs and alcohol. And it's those people who get into boats and snowmobiles and cars. And I'm sorry, that's not acceptable.
So you're talking about all DWIs, not just on?
Oh, yes, all yes. I'm talking about the DWI law and making stiffer penalties.
Have you talked to legislators?
No, not yet. I'm going to wait until the trial is over. I'm part of a trust, and it would not be appropriate for me to go on the bandwagon now.
How do you spell your last name?
Lonnie, L-O-N-N-E-E.
Do you know, would the parents of Alan be willing to say a few words just about the new law and your thoughts on it?
I have no idea what she said.
Just wondering if you want to say a few words.
Oh, God, I just wondered. I do have one thing to say. I'd like to thank the people of the state of Minnesota, our elected officials, and hopefully the people of the state of Minnesota, this will be the last time that you ever have to hear about Alan's Law, because you're going to be responsible. That's all I have. Thank you.
For the DNR, is this going to cost the DNR any more money or time?
So the question is, will this cost the DNR any more money or any more time? Actually, this is going to streamline some processes for law enforcement across the state, because currently, if a deputy, for example, would stop or if any law enforcement officer would stop a traditional motor vehicle, there's an e-charging process where everything is done electronically. With the wrecked vehicles and watercraft, that had to be done manually, the old-fashioned way with paper. So now that all these because of the exemptions. Now that the exemptions are gone, we'll be able to streamline that process so that e-charging can be done, whether it's an ATV, snowmobile, or motorboat. And because of those exemptions being lifted, it's basically some cosmetic changes to that e-charging system that will have very minimal fiscal impact.
So it will be easier for the officers?
Yes, to process the paperwork, yes.
Rod, we kind of spoke with DNR, the boat safety season kicked off. Could you just give a statement? I mean, so much of our culture, you know, it's the beers on the snowmobile trails, it's the summer beer, July 4th weekend on a boat. How do you break that sort of mentality? I mean, you know, I know it's probably not in respect as much on the roads, but there is that belief that drunk driving is wrong on the roads, but so much of society is just sort of cliche around booze and recreational vehicles. How do you break that?
So, there is a cultural change in this state, moving away from that alcohol is not a problem when it comes to when I'm recreating. And that's one of the reasons these loopholes existed in the first place, is because when DWI laws were starting to form, people said, no, I'm out having fun on my watercraft or on my snowmobile, and I shouldn't be held to the same standard. But make no mistake, and people see this, that people that operate recreational vehicles can kill people just as easily as they can in a minivan or a pickup truck or any other traditional motor vehicle. And so the culture change is there. It's slow, like a lot of culture change in this state, but you see much more responsible operators. You see clubs such as the Minnesota United Snowmobile Association or the ATV Association of Minnesota actively going out and talking to their members about, what is proper ways to recreate in this state. And so the culture changes here. It's slow, but it's here.
How many tickets a year are written for people with boats, ATVs, or snowmobiles?
So finding people that are operating a snowmobile, ATV, or a boat under the influence can be difficult. Normally what you need to do is have another type of violation in order to see to stop somebody to see if they're impaired or not. If you're driving a boat, it's not like a motor vehicle where you're driving down a highway and there's a fog line and a center line and they go back and forth. Most people that ride a snowmobile want to go back and forth. Most people that are driving a boat, there is no center line or a fog line on a lake. And so detecting those violations are a little bit more difficult. Unfortunately, when we do stop them, those violators do seem to be much higher than a normal DWI. We seem to get a lot more gross misdemeanors, people that are above twice the legal limit when we do stop them, especially on watercraft.
Do you have the numbers?
Not with me right now, but I can get them.
Appreciate that. And would you expect the number of people charged with DWI to go up for any reason under this new law?
Like I said earlier, this law change is not about the detection or the stopping. It's more about the back end of a DWI arrest, where with the suspensions and all the other chemical assessments and whatnot to make it more in tune with traditional DWIs.
So you don't expect
possibly, I don't know.
Does DNR charge most of the people with these vehicles, or the deputies, city officers charge as many?
It's a mix. So, we do have grant agreements with a number of counties where we pass through money for sheriff's offices to do some water patrol, or sheriff's offices to do some ATV or snowmobile enforcement. So, it depends on the county. I mean, there's some counties that are blessed with much more water than other counties, so they obviously have more activity.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.